Добрый день, уважаемые друзья. Рад вас приветствовать на событии, которое традиционно открывает деловой год. Гайдаровский форум «Россия и мир». И тема форума 2022 года «Приоритеты». Собеседника нашего гостя Анатолий Chubais. Самое сложное это как вас правильно представить. Я решил представить вашу текущую позицию и должность. Специальный представитель президента Российской Федерации по связям с международными организациями. Сегодня тема нашей дискуссии: может ли энергопереход перезапустить экономический рост в России? И тема, получается, состоит из крайне актуальных вопросов.
It can be broken down into two parts. First is the energy transition proper, and the second is the economic growth. And I mean economic growth is pretty much a fixture for the economic forum, for the Gaidar forum. It has been discussed previously. Then energy transition is something different. Yesterday was the watershed moment when it has become a commonplace. Even more so, it's an institution now. And we do have a rather broad agenda for our forum today. So let me start with a flash interview so that we can establish some rapport and it will be easier for people to follow the discussion. So first things first, energy transition. What is this? What's the goal of it? And have we been through such stages before? Answer. I think you have defined the trend properly. Any transition goes through three stages. First is, this is bullshit, not going to happen. Second stage, well, there's something to it. Stage 3 is, well, this is the common knowledge, come on. So we moved on from the stage 1 to stage 2 now. And this is a crucial thing. Even the terminology, the conceptual framework is not quite there yet. So how do we define it in easy to grasp terms? So let me start with the big picture. Look at the whole technological sphere. It can be broken down to three parts: materials, information, and energy. There's nothing more to it. Look at the building around us. It's built of some materials. There are some lighting and fixtures here. And then the information flow somehow manages the interaction of all these parts. And it just happened, and we might have noticed it or not, that we are living in the age of global revolution in one of these domains, the information domain. If you go back a little bit, you'll remember the first PCs, the mobile phones. If you go even further back, you'll be able to understand that not just the communication style changed, it's not how the conferences waged and organized, but we also have new media, new social media, and this is indeed a revolution. It has changed beyond recognition all domains of human life, and I think it's been waging for the last 25 to 30 years. I think the first tablet I ever saw was in 1991 or something, so roughly 30 years ago. So it is my firm conviction that what we now term an industrial transition or energy transition, in its scale, can be compared to the technological revolution proper. So what essentially is this? I think that humanity has finally wrapped its collective mind around the fact that the current technological trends will drive global warming, and the global warming itself is driven by anthropological impact. And if we put it in a nutshell, it is driven by CO2 emissions. So where this CO2 comes from carbon. So you know, the C is carbon and H is hydrogen. Put together, it's the fossil fuels that we burn. We burn rocks to melt rocks. And it means that this is the underpinning capstone of our economy. So we need to remove it somehow. We need to remove it and substitute it with something.
so as keep the whole structure stable. Since humanity is not going to decrease the level of energy consumption, and there is direct correlation, it cannot be decreased, and there's direct correlation between the living standards and energy consumption. I mean, energy is life today. Well, it is in fact going up, yes, indeed. So if we look at the gist of the energy transition, it is this. When many people argue, well, you're talking about renewables, aren't you? Well, partially so. I'd say that renewables would compose perhaps up to 5% of the energy sector, but it will require rethinking and reinventing housing and amenities, agriculture, industry, energy, and many, many other areas beyond that, many other areas of economy. The sheer scale of change would be so dramatic that some industries will wither and be tapered down, and new industries will come up to replace them. Question. Okay, let me now clarify this statement and pose it somewhat rhetorical question. When we say energy transition, we mean a global process. First, it must take place globally. And second, since there are three components you mentioned, materials, information, and energy, meaning that technology and the transfer of technology and knowledge must be transparent. I mean, it's a very complicated task. So we would assume that this process will be taken place in a completely open and transparent world, without any barriers or impediments. Or do you mean that we have to deal it on our own, each of our nations? Well, do we talk about real life? Or are we talking about the would-bes and wannabes? You know that any nation and any country is driven by national interests and nothing else. Well, we can be naive, we can just, join our hands and sing Kumbaya. Well, not gonna happen. Do we really believe that we will redo the energy sphere and live happily ever after? It's not gonna happen. What do we have in reality? It is a challenge, and this challenge is perceived as a global one. Look at the Glasgow conference. I think it brought together 100-something states, something unprecedented, if you ask me. And yet, each country has to come up with its own national strategy for energy transition that would be fitting into the bigger picture of its national interests. So I see broadly two types of national strategies. First is this. All right, guys, you just figure out how to settle it down for yourself. We have businesses to run, we have companies to govern. Just don't get in the way. That's the first type. The second type is something different. Energy transition is not just about reaching carbon neutrality. It's the change between the technospheres, the technological spheres. It's creation of the new ones that are inexistent at the moment, which would mean that 20 years from now, countries that will choose this path will be the global elites. Just imagine the Type 1 countries. 20 years from now, what would be this country? It would be akin to a country without internet today. Well, that's a nonsense. No social media, no communications. Well, you probably have the phone booths, but that's it. Could you imagine the level of development of such a country? Well, if we are not, if we don't use strong language, it would be a dead-end economic model, wouldn't it? And the second type country is something different. And a fundamental thing to understand is that Russia was at the road fork up until recently. And it insisted on the Type 1 strategy. And President Putin was the one who made the choice and said, spelled it in no uncertain terms, that Russia has to go on the carbon neutrality path. And the government, as instructed by the president, has come up with the low-carbon development strategy. What does this mean? It means that Russia went through the most difficult stage of this transition. It's the setting the stage, setting the goals. And we went not the dumb way, we went the smart way. And this is this fundamentally important thing. Question. Well, let me concluded in this way. So we have become a country that snatches the stones thrown into it and use them to build an edifice of something constructive and valid. Many people would argue that this agenda was imposed upon us, and it's not quite so. And let me cite an interesting fact. It's 2002, 20 years ago, you graduate from the university with a major in of challenges of global energy, and you focused on hydrogen economy for Russia, prospects for hydrogen economy for Russia. So let me focus on prospects. What are the prospects that open up on Russia's path as we look into the future? Perhaps it could be, a cookie-cutter solution, but what is the role of Russia in this new world? Are we a resource colony, or do we supply solutions? Do we create some kind of a turnkey projects? Do we create finished products? Or is it something completely different? Answer. Well, this is indeed a serious question. I'll try to be as concise and succinct as possible, and I'd have to simplify to answer this. Again, there are two types of industrial energy transitions. Again, it will be broken down into industry-specific processes by industry and country by country. So we can roughly break them down into two types. First, it's the existing industries that will have to go through profound restructuring. By way of example, let's take ferrous metallurgy. A, we have to electrify it. B, we'll have to look into the direct reduced iron production and use something else instead of carbon. And then we'll have to get reduced iron through hydrogen, which is a revolutionary solution, and not using the typical way of processing ore. All of these areas are pretty clear, and yet I'd say that I would doubt that Russia would actually invent some kind of a new technology. It is Sweden that pioneers the DRI production from hydrogen. And I think we will be on the receiving end of the technology transfer in this particular domain. But let's look into the type 2 industry-specific energy transition. It is happening in the industries in existence as of today. And I think there is up to a dozen of industries. Industries, mind you, that do not exist at the moment. And they might come into being, and we have fundamental premises for them to appear. We have the natural resources and technology and knowledge. Let me give you two examples. The first one would be hydrogen. Clearly, I mean, this is common knowledge. It's an open secret. It's the new blue fuel of tomorrow. And Russia has fantastic advantages that can push it forward. I think it can be selling 6 to 10 billion tons of hydrogen annually. And these are immense numbers. Creating hydrogen industry, meaning creation, storage, transportation, would be a challenging and daunting task. And Russia will be blazing its trail. It will be a pioneer, effectively. And it means that in these industries, we'll be able to create something that did not exist before. And the second example, it's the carbon storage and sequestration. Again, it is quite evident that this will be a huge industry going forward. Let me put it simply. For hundreds of years, we've been extracting gas, fuel, oil, whatever, you name it, and created all kinds of drilled holes in the earth crust. Then we burned these resources, and the idea that the gases that were emitted in the process will be pumped back. Several years ago, this was science fiction. I mean, people were joking that, well, take the thermal power plant, take the funnel and just direct it down. Is this what you mean? Not quite so. Gazprom is creating very specific technology in the Amur region, And the project is on carbon sequestration with the production capacity of 1.5 million tons. So the goal is to follow example of the global leaders. We do understand what the underground storage is. We understand how to convert it into something fit for the hydrogen industry needs. Norway, I think, together with the UK, is working on a similar project in the North Sea. So I think they were thinking about pumping these gases back into offshore drilled storage facilities, meaning that they would have to use the tankers to transport it. So that would be more expensive. And I think that storing it onshore would be up to 2 times cheaper. The point I'm trying to make is that Russia will have a competitive edge, both in efficiency and in potential volumes produced and processed. I know not of any other country in the world that could be as efficient and as effective in tackling this issue. Okay, the question is, what do we do about coal? What do we do about oil and gas? It's the major income producer for our country. So we cannot close it down, but we cannot save it. Answer. Okay, don't pile it up all together. Gas, oil, and coal are 3 different things. We'll not go into these details, so otherwise we'll stay up until some ungodly hour. Let me focus on coal. Do we shut down the coal-fired plants? We know the difficult decisions made in Glasgow and globally. Well, the answer is no, obviously not. Coal has a global market, and it's been here and it will be here for decades to come. I've been quite engaged in the coal industry, and I do know that it's one of the most, perhaps the most difficult, most daunting, most dangerous type of human occupation. Just think about the working environment there. So we will have to extract every last ton of it from the earth. Again, we find new niches, we find new markets. I mean, China is at loggerheads with Australia. They ban Australian coal, so it's a huge market. The prices go up, so a loss for someone will be a fine for somebody else.
But let's look beyond what's going to happen not in 2022, but going next. I mean, we may use this situation for our purposes, but we may also look further on. Chinese leader Xi Jinping said that China will start to curb its domestic market, not decelerating its growth, but it's going to decrease the domestic market, and it will stop investments in coal-fired stations around the world. But it used to be the investor number 1 in India, Africa, and Latin America. That means that we're going to see contraction of the market. That market is going to shrink. Will they shrink their own production or production elsewhere? Well, it's an easy guess. And that applies to coking coal and to other types of coal, and we have great deposits here in Russia. So we need to understand that this strategy will not yield any growth. And we do have this key blueprint, energy strategy through 2025. And we just have to revamp it. It was designed by the people who thought that there's not going to be any energy transition. And they were wrong, and it's the worst kind of mistake. You know, we have the strategy of the oil industry, the strategy of the power sector. It has to be revised and overhauled. I talk so much about it, but we now have an instruction from the president that all of the strategies have to be revised, not through 2035, but through 2050, and there's going to be new targets. And that the second component, should we shut our eyes and just move blindly forward? No, we're going to face a concrete wall. No, we shouldn't make strategic mistakes. These are the worst types of mistakes.
Как вы правильно сказали, тут о каждой можно говорить. А есть ли какой-то потенциал?
Question. Now, you said we can talk about every component for a long time, but is there any capacity to use it in any alternative way?
Сейчас можно поговорить, допустим, о газе или о нефти.
Okay, we can talk about natural gas or oil. How can we use them in an alternative way? You know, they say that we're going to run out of oil, but we still have quite good deposits. Maybe we can use it in a different way. Answer. Well, the Stone Age ended not because we ran out of stones. No, we'll not run out of oil or gas, but we'll still see this energy transition. Can we use it in an alternative way? Well, in a simplified manner, we can use oil in the following way. We know that we just burn most of oil. It's diesel fuel, it's gasoline, but some of it is processed, refined into chemicals. So I looked at the share, it's 85 to 15. 85% is burned, and 15% is refined. As for natural gas, it's 95 to 5. These are the proportions. Now, the first strategic track is to start changing these proportions. We can and should use our natural resources to redistribute those proportions. Sibur and Gazprom have now started moving along this path. They have a project in the Amur region. That's the strategy. We need to continue pump investment into it. And again, we have so much natural gas, and we'll be able to use it when it's going to be difficult to burn it, or when we're going to be banned from burning in it. So we need to focus on rethinking and overhauling the petrochemical industry. Question. Thank you. And now we can seg into economic growth. So it seems to make sense. Revolution is inevitable. It is taking place, even if you've not noticed, and we do have global demand, and Russia does have some competitive advantages, and we need to be able to leverage those advantages to capitalize on those pros. And you said that we need to start from social policy. Why? Answer. Well, just imagine the scale of the industry-specific changes that we're talking about right now. Construction, manufacturing, energy, oil and gas sectors. It's going to be a painful process, inevitably. You know, I've spearheaded some of the reforms, and we spend so much on retraining, requalification, the support for the miners, and that has helped us to finalize a mining reform that has been recognized as one of the most successful ones. So this is why our social policy needs to be upgraded so that we can adapt to that transition. In a nutshell, our social policy relies mainly on helping some categories of people. It could be people with several children, retirees. Yes, it's fine, it's clear, but my granddaughters got some subsidies for COVID-19. That's wrong. We also need to, it needs to be means tested. We need to look at the income. If you have a high income, you don't need any taxpayer money from the budget, even if they have 5 children or more. So we need to move to those means-tested subsidies. We need to look at per capita income. And the government is aware of this. We have this social treasury project. So it's the right move. And given the prospects of energy transition, this social policy would be in greater demand. Question. Okay, let's add a more optimistic, a more realistic note. Earlier we said that the energy transition for the vast majority is sci-fi. They all nod, they say, yes, we know what it's all about, but as a member of the governing board of the UN Global Compact Russia, I can safely say that our association brings together representatives from different industries, mining and manufacturing, refining, and they've been dealing with it in some way or other. So just for our audience, I'd like to say that this is reality, this is here to stay. Maybe you can cite some examples. In more detail. Well, there are dozens of case studies. The first thing that comes to my mind is, well, you talked about the coal industry. It seems to be really something horrible. Okay, let's take Sakhalin, the Eastern Mining Company. 12 million tons of coal that was mined last year. So what do? They've got a host of projects. One, they do, the huge trucks that carry coal from those quarries. They use diesel generators to electrify them. So they electrify these huge Belas trucks. So they put the special equipment on top of this truck. And it gets electricity from this transmission line, and it becomes an electric vehicle, and that means curbing CO2 emissions. I think their distance is about 25 kilometers, and they've now finalized a conveyor belt. It's kind of indoors. And again, it's electrified, and they're going to deliver coal right from the quarry to the port. And thirdly, they're going to build wind generators, a windmill, 65 megawatts. It means that they're going to stay in the market for much longer than those who think it's only sci-fi, that it's the Russia's enemies who'd like to feed us with these crazy ideas. But those who adopt it will will win in the longer term. The question, since you talk about the Far East, Russia's Far East, I know that you worked there, and there are tidal power, wind, solar. So it's all renewables, and there have been reports of plans to unfreeze a project to build a tidal power plant in Kamchatka. So what are the prospects for those non-conventional projects? Well, I've invested so much effort into it, and I'll try to be brief. Russia's Far East has potential for 2 tidal power stations. One is Tugur in the Khabarovsk region, and the other is Pemzhinsky and Kamchatka. And I've worked on this project for a long time, and what I realized that there's not going to be demand for them in the existing energy supply mix. But we built a range, the only tidal power range. We've brought in some turbines, but we realized that it doesn't really make sense. It's not feasible to build those tidal power stations. And then hydrogen came in, and that made us to rethink this project. So if it's the Pemzhinsky or Tugur tidal power plant, and if we built an electrolysis power plant, and then you're going to have a port nearby, and then we'll export hydrogen to Japan, for example, and by 2030, Japan will consume 3 million tons of hydrogen. But how much will it produce? Zero. Zilch nada. So it's $15 billion, and Japan says, I want that hydrogen. So we've got a new market. So we got this tidal power station, we've got the port and this plant, and it's going to change everything. So we're now doing the calculations. So I'm just giving you some of the just giving you a brief analysis, and we'll get the feasibility study, we'll see whether it's economically viable, and if it is so indeed, then tidal power and renewables for Russia's Far East is going to be the best driver. You know, the north is great for wind, Russia's Far East is great for wind and solar, and that would mean that solar, wind and tidal power and electrolysis. This is the green hydrogen everyone's talking about, the cleanest of hydrogens. And that could help us rake in hundreds of billions of US dollars. We don't have any other promising projects like this. So if feasibility studies prove this, reconfirm this, that's going to usher in new projects with so many investments for Russia's Far East that it's not seen for decades. Question. Well, you said it's going to be a national project, and everyone usually says it's a state-run project. Would it be a state-run project, or would it be a PPP? And we work a lot with ministries and agencies, and they're honest. They're straightforward. They understand that the private sector could implement this project much faster. Do we have private investors, and who are they? The Russian business has been able to consolidate around this issue, around a company which is called Rusnano. We have a consortium bringing together more than 20 top companies from Russia, and they've financed a genuine research. It involves top international consultants. It's quite expensive, and that will yield the results that's going to be published. So let's look at the markets, as I said, in terms of hydrogen. Japan, South Korea, Western Europe, etc. Now let's look at the technological set. Electrolysis, steam conversion. Let's look at the amount of resources we have. And now let's look at the routes. So we have tidal power, nuclear in Russia's Far East. Let's look at what we have in the West. And then we can see what's the share out of this new technology cluster has to be set up by the private business, and where we need some support from the government. If you take this electrolysis plant, that's a private business project. The port with transshipment, well, that's a long lead time project, so this is why we need government support. You know, sometimes people say it's good for the government, it's bad for the business community. No, it's wrong. We just need to take component by component. And I said the export volumes could be like 50 billion US dollars. We just need to break it down into where we need private capital, where we need state capital. And earlier in late October, Prime Minister Mishustin brought the best minds, the best brains from the regions, from across the states, and the ultimate goal is not to get some vague answer. No, it's it's simple. We need to have very specific blueprint. The share of the government, the share of the private sector. So by February, March, we're going to have a clear answers to the questions set by the Prime Minister in October. Question. That's great. Can I Can you tell us what you've been doing recently? In December 2020, you were appointed the special representative for relations with international organizations. So congratulations on this 2-year anniversary. There are so many international organizations around the world, and I understand it's a 1-year anniversary. So what kind of organizations are you working with, and do you think we should be working with? So can you give us a taxonomy of those organizations? So what kind of assistance will we get from them? What's your role as a visionary, as a firebrand that's going to enable this transformation? Yes, I'm quite a young envoy. I'm just 1 year old. Although, it's so fast-paced. I think Russia has made so much progress, and we weren't able to do that in the past decade. So you asked, who do we work with and what do we work on? Europe is the global leader. It started much earlier than the US. They have this ETS exchange, and so they've been engaged in the COO credits trading, and we just need to, embrace that experience. Second, China. China built the same kind of trading exchange. They've copy-pasted the European model, and China's climate policy is one of the most exciting things, and no one really understands anything about it. And now we're doing research into it. We are looking into this climate policy. I mentioned some of the Chinese leaders' statement, and in this case, China is the most important partner. And third is the US. We know that President Biden, on his second day, once he was voted into office, he said the US needs to go back to the Paris climate agreement. We know what John Kerry is doing. So these are the 3 geopolitical centers that will shape the rules. So what do we need from them?
That's what we need from them. Let me give you a specific example, something that you've mentioned. We have in Orenburg, the Russian city of Orenburg, a major project for construction of a huge-scale carbon storage and sequestration. If my assumption is right, that its specific capex will make it the cheapest option by far that any of the competition, that would mean that we will be welcoming more and more investors, which means that Russia must open up the opportunity to gain and garner cheap funding and financing. I think President mentioned that $50 billion US would be the capacity of the carbon market. But then there are projects unrelated to CO2 credits. So we are talking about the capex to the tune of several dozens of millions and billions of dollars. So what do we need to do about it in terms of our interaction with China, Europe, and US? We need to tackle one single task, to harmonize our efforts. We are starting the creation of a most complicated market of energy transition, and Andrei Belousov is on the task 24/7. He's being briefed on what's happening in energy, what's happening in industry, and this is a daunting task. If this effort is not in tune with the global efforts, that would mean that we will lose the access to a huge pool of funding, which is why we are currently looking into the creation of the carbon market. Again, even the name is a complicated task. What would be the proper title? So we are trying to harmonize our efforts. Question. Okay, that's an interesting point, and I am a proponent of the notion that we live in a global world, in a globalized one. Yes, there are certain reservations in this statement, but we need to look for partners and choose our direction of development, given the global agenda. That being said, I would very much want to continue this discussion, but we are stuck for time. Time is of the essence, and we have to wrap it up with a final question. I think the conversation itself has given us plenty of food for thought. Now we have to digest this food and to wrap our minds around to understand that this paradigm is what the future is now. So, for 12 years, you've been the head of Rusnano, Russian Innovative Development and Research Institute, and I'm quite confident that over this time you've grown to be an expert. I think you've got plenty of experience of working with this kind of technology, so something from the futurology domain. Could you cite some examples of new technology that will define the image of future, not just tomorrow, but perhaps the day after tomorrow? And let me set the bar even higher. Something to the scale of Nikola Tesla. His contemporaries told that he invented the 20th century. Do we have similar names? Yes, we do. Yes, we do such names, and they work for Rusnano. Let me put it this way. What was the purpose for creation of Rusnano? To create the nano industry. There are many of complications that we've encountered on the way. I'll spare you the gruesome details, but the nano industry has been created. Look at the sheer scale of the industry. Now, what specific examples can I cite as I answer your question? Let me go back to what I've started. I've said the technosphere is comprised of information materials and energy, and we've said that energy transition in Russia is the key process right now. But you see, the role of materials in the energy transition is just as essential as the role of energy. And if we will be able to create a stronger, more resilient materials, the basic materials, metals, plastics, cement, these are the three materials that comprise the technosphere. If we make them stronger, more robust, it would effectively mean that Russia will be enhancing its energy efficiency. The best car made by Mercedes weighs 2 tons and can transport 5, well, rather fat individuals to a range of, 600-700 kilometers. So it's the efficiency coefficient of 25% for the best car in the world. Can we make it better? I'm sure we can. And if we do this, it means that we will be burning less fossil fuels, we'll be using fewer materials. And its impact on the energy transition will be just as substantial in the energy transition. And if we make a major bid for leadership, we should look beyond the niche applications, not industry-specific application, even renewables. Well, I'm a sucker for renewables, if you ask me, but this is an industry-specific technology. And if we look beyond, we would arrive at platform technology, something that would be a game changer for materials. The entire cluster. Does this technology exist? Yes, it does. That's what I call wall-mounted carbon nano tubes, and I think that it can put the world upside down. It would change the world as we know it, and Russia is the leader in this industry. The market capitalization exceeded $2 billion for the company that is dealing in this technology, but we are just starting. This is the budding project of the Rusnano, and I do hope that it will be not just a Russian project, but a global one, that it would not be an industry-specific, it would be a platform solution. Given all things that we have discussed, the whole ground we've covered, I think this is what will bring Russia into the future. Mr. Chubais, it's been a distinctive pleasure. Dear audience, thank you for watching, thank you for tuning in. Russia and the world will go into future hand in hand, and this is a great motto to go by. Stay tuned. We'll have plenty of interesting things going your way, and thank you for your time. Thank you for the questions and for the conversation.